to say the purpose and work of the Holy Spirit. He said in verse 8, and when the Holy Spirit, is come, he will reprove the world of sin and of righteousness and of judgment. Now first, the Holy Spirit's arrival was absolutely necessary to the carrying on of the work of Christ on earth. The primary objective of the Holy Spirit is to reprove or convince the world by the ministry that is in Christ's followers about the reality of sin and the existence of righteousness, and that judgment is coming. We don't like to talk about that sometimes, and I understand. We're going to talk about what righteousness is and where that comes from, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that. The convincing work is the work of the Holy Spirit. When the Holy Spirit does it, it is effective work. Now, ministers and other followers of Christ may speak about the truths of God and His Word. The Holy Spirit will lead us into witnessing, teaching, preaching, evangelizing, counseling, and through other methods of getting the gospel message across, and even through song. The Holy Spirit will convict our consciences and will cause us, to know and recognize and acknowledge the wickedness of their ways. Now, we could approach a person all day long and tell them they're wrong, tell them that the things that they're doing is wicked, if we dare. And some may respond because they've been taught or they know truth. They might receive it as, okay, this is God trying to speak to me now. There are many people out there that knew God and know God and have been living in a backslidden condition. And they're sometimes hanging on by a thread. And they're hoping that God will change things in their life one day, but they don't know how to find their way out. Because once the enemy gets his hooks in you, he's not about to let you go easily. Now, that is like 10 times more potent for a backslider, because he already knows what he's dealing with. He knows that this person has had a relationship with God. This person knows God. They know of the goodness of God. And if they ever find their way back, they're going to have what a wonderful testimony, but they're also going to be much more on fire for God, because they're going to be that much more grateful for God receiving them back. And that witness about being received back from God, it's an exciting moment. It's a time that you're just grateful, and sometimes many tears are falling, and a person starts to recognize how limited they were in their life without God. And they realize also that sin does lead to death when it is finished. And so it was a rescue. And the Lord said that He would literally leave the 99 and go after that one, because He loves that one so much. And He knows His own. And He also lets us know that that those that love Him and have a relationship with Him, they know His voice, and a stranger they won't follow. And so we will respond to God when it is by the power and the work of the Holy Spirit that is creating the atmosphere in the heart, or the condition of the heart, to respond. Now, our job would be to witness and to talk about it, or to teach and preach, and whatever it is we do that God has given us to do. And so some would plant the seeds, and some with water. And then it's the Holy Spirit that brings the increase. In other words, it brings it to effectual work. It accomplishes what it goes after. And so we are in cooperation as God's children to present the gospel to those who would hear. Now, we don't have to stand there and wait and think we got to do all the work. We do what God has given us to do. God will send someone else and someone else. but it is the Holy Spirit that'll bring that to life, and then that's where the conviction power comes in. And it's a scary thing to have known God, and somehow the power of conviction is not there. Sometimes people can resist God for so long, or turn their back on Him for so long, and deny Him in their hearts and minds because they're not willing to obey. And that voice becomes dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. And the more we resist, the harder it is for us to hear Him when we're in that condition. And it's a sad state to get to where you can know the truth, hear the truth, and not be able to respond to the truth because you're no longer convicted by the things that you're doing, and you know them to be wrong.
Yes.
That's a scary place to be. It's a horrible place to be, because we also know that in many cases, and the Word lets us know, that when people insist, He will turn them over to that thing that they feel is so much more important than God Himself. And so we don't want to go there and stay there. And we don't want to be in that condition. And we need to have an ear to hear and be able to respond and allow God, His Holy Spirit, to do the work that He is sent to do in us. A person, the Holy Spirit will convict our consciences and will cause them to know, recognize, and acknowledge the wickedness of their ways.
Yes, sir.
A person's natural conscience will tell them that murder or stealing or adultery and many other obvious sins, and they can recognize those as sins. But it is the supernatural work of the Holy Spirit that convinces them that it is a sin to suspend their belief of the gospel and to reject the salvation offered by it. And most people just say, well, it's a choice. We all have a choice, and that is true. But God enlightens us enough to know that even the rejection of Christ is a sin in itself. And it's a sin that can create a greater breach between the person and God, especially if they have known God. But God is patient. He compels. He draws. He loves us. And He wants us to come back into the fold. Now, in regards to righteousness, the Holy Spirit will convince the world that Jesus of Nazareth was the Christ, the righteous one. So what are we talking about righteousness? Well, in brief, righteousness is to be in good standing with God, or to be in right standing with God. And we know that we can't accomplish that on our own. And years ago, we did a study on the mind of God. And it took us back into the Old Testament, which is a good place to start. And so many times, God, His Spirit would search the earth looking for a righteous man. And it's actually a shame that He would have to look so hard. And then He found those ones that were considered righteous were always those ones who would live in obedience to God. They had faith. They would obey. When God would speak to them, they would respond. Now, the Bible also lets us know that there's nothing we can do to earn the status of righteousness today. And that the righteousness that we experience is allotted to us, or as a status from what Christ has done. Even our best works, whatever we can accomplish on our own, that might be something in the eyes of people, and we say, well, people can look and say, oh, that is a righteous man. Oh, that's a righteous woman. Well, even that is considered as filthy rags before God, because there's nothing we can do to earn that status in and of ourselves. And we thank God that He did send His Son, so that Christ successfully accomplished, as that ultimate sacrifice, to present that before God on our behalf, so that when God sees us and we belong to Christ, He sees us through the lenses and through what Christ had accomplished. And so we get accredited that status. Now, with that said, it doesn't relieve us of responsibility. So when it comes to righteousness, we know that that's already been attributed or accredited to us who have accepted Christ, who has His Holy Spirit, and are led by His Spirit. So it's not about works. It's not about all the things or the busyness that we can do in order to feel like we have achieved something in that way. For us now today, it's about obedience. And obedience is stressed. He said, if you love me, you'll do what I say. If you love me, you'll follow my direction. And that's how we show God that we love Him. And so love is a mutual, it's a reciprocal arrangement that is demonstrated between us and the Father. We love Him, so we serve Him. We love Him, so we obey Him. We do what He tells us that we are to do. And so, again, the Holy Spirit has many functions, but one of the primary ones we're talking about also is of judgment. It says, because the prince of this world is judged, he was discovered to be the great deceiver and destroyer. We're also told that he's the father of lies. And so it's his job, and he's very good at it, to deceive us, to create ideas and thoughts in our head, to tempt us, and to pull us away from what God would have us to be doing, how God would have us to be living. And so he already knows he's judged. Now with us, the Holy Spirit convicts us of sin and then draws us into a closer relationship with God. It's not about the guilt or so much living in a state of guilt and condemnation. God isn't trying to beat us down, but he doesn't have a problem with showing us where we're wrong. And he does that out of love because he wants us to be in a relationship with him. And those who want to please God will follow his lead and will do what he says. And a lot of times what I've noticed is, in families, and I know there's many who can identify with this. There's been problems in the home, conflict, many disagreements, and so the family or the couple, they drive to church. Sometimes they're fighting on the way there, and they come into the sanctuary, and they kind of put on a different face, and then they worship God, and they're showing or presenting an image. And by the time they get back to the car, get the seatbelts on, and the engine started, they're back in the warfare again. And so there's it's not always the way it appears about what's going on in people's lives. And it is Satan's job to keep us at odds with one another, or to keep that division there, or to keep us fighting one another and not seeming to be able to communicate, on the same page, not actually walking together in the way that God had designed it to be. And I know there's so many people that would say, well, you don't know my situation. You don't know what she did. You don't know what he did. You don't know what they say to me. You don't know how I'm being treated, and those kind of things. Well, usually misery loves company. And when a person has been injured or hurt, unfortunately, they're going to dish it right back out at you. And that is not the way God would have us to do it. That's a lie from the enemy that kind of tucks, one of his deceiving points is where if he can tuck away the injuries that have occurred in our life and then we keep them safely tucked away in here. We do a verbal, yes, I forgive you, but our heart is nowhere near it. And so we can act it out, that unforgiveness towards one another in so many different ways. And so when true forgiveness has occurred, and we have freed one another for the trespasses and maybe lack of discretion, and sometimes some very harsh kinds of things that have happened, then we are free to be who God has called us to be. And not just when we're sitting in the congregation appearing to be in a good state or in a good place. And unfortunately, it's the culture. Sometimes people have a hard time really showing or telling anybody that they're struggling. And that's especially true for those that are in leadership. Because, they may be disciplined, they may have to sit down, and they feel like they're going to be judged. They're going to be judged by the ones that are their brothers and sisters who love them. Because there's this expectation, if you have an issue or you have a problem, well, you could cause someone else to fall, or you could cause someone else to become discouraged. But it also creates the kind of situation where a person can't be honest, or they feel they can't be honest, and truthfully say that, you know what, yes, I'm a minister, or yes, I'm a deacon, or whatever my office is, and I'm having problems. I'm having some real problems, and I'm not going to just pretend to be something that I'm not, and I'm not going to pretend to be living in a way that I'm not. I want this to be better. I want to heal. I want my marriage to truly recover. And God offers that opportunity to us. But the enemy is so full of deception and lies. He has his way of creating space where the Holy Spirit should be in our hearts. And we go deeper and darker into those places the longer we hold on to whatever it is that has happened to us, or whatever it is we're having trouble getting over. Couples are not honest with each other about what's really going on with them inside. They're not honest with how they really feel about what has occurred sometimes. And so it just goes on and on and on. But God is more than able to bring the healing that we need. And sometimes trust is a big issue with being honest and transparent, because nobody wants to be vulnerable when you don't know for sure that the person you're being vulnerable with can respect that and knows what to do with that. So there's so many pieces to it. But we have to take a risk. We have to trust God, and we have to believe God that He's going to help us, and that we're not alone, and that He can help us to get through anything. And we can't bypass our spouse, in order to really get to God. And too many people take that route. They'll route around their spouse and then do a service and say, well, I'm doing God's work. Well, what happened to, it beginning in the home? What happened to your first call? What happened to the responsibility that we have to one another? So God has things arranged in such a way that we can't bypass. He says, how can you say you love me, whom you have not seen, and yet hate your brother? Well, how can you say that you love God, who you have not seen, and hate your husband or hate your wife? And you want to bypass them to get to God. Well, I don't think that's the way it's designed to be. We have an order to things, and there's an expectation that God has about who we are, our relationship, and how we grow closer to Him. We can't get around responsibility. We can't pretend like it doesn't exist. We can't do any of those things, because all you're doing is cycling. You're just cycling, and nothing's getting accomplished. And I have talked to seasoned ministers and pastors and bishops even, and I asked a couple, do you have any regrets? Is there anything you would do different? And I had one person several years ago say, I would have spent more time with my wife. I would have spent more time with my son. who's struggling, is having some issues. So we can't, say we're doing all this for God, and then we have those that are sitting right next to us, or sitting right there, who are struggling and having a hard time. And then we're calling it, well, I'm working for God, I'm doing service for God, and bypass the ones that he put right in front of you. We can't do that. So, now, Jesus said also in John chapter 10, verse 10, he goes, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that you may have life, and that you might have it to the fullest. And God isn't coming to limit our life. He's not coming to cramp your style, so to speak. He wants us to realize that what we call our style is many times fleshly kinds of things, or we want to do our own thing. But if we choose God and we choose Him correctly, and we stay on that narrow path, it is more than enough. He can fulfill us in ways that is hard to even imagine. And so when a person got used to a way of life, it's hard for them to imagine another kind of way of life. But God is offering a kind of life that is really full, and He fulfills us in that. And He trusts us to be responsible to respond to Him when He's speaking to us about our families, about whatever it is we're doing, on the job, our neighbors. God expects us to live holy and to live right. And the convicting power of the Holy Spirit is there to bring that to our attention. And we don't have to live in those kinds of conditions that limit us in so many ways. And so again, I'm saying that we're building this. We haven't got to the outpouring of the Holy Spirit yet, but we're building this to understand what it is that the Holy Spirit does in us, who the Holy Spirit is, His office, His job, and how He empowers us and equips us as we go forward in the Lord. So, for now, that is it for me.